Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever found biblical interpretation to be just a dry, dusty academic exercise, well, get ready, because the insights from Dr. David Bauer's Inductive Bible Study are really going to completely change your perspective on this. We're going to treat this as a thrilling process, basically mapping out ancient territory and cracking implicit ancient codes to uncover the true meaning. Honestly, when you learn how to read the structure and identify the exact genre of what you're looking at, a text you've probably read 100 times suddenly just snaps into brilliant, sharp focus.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, breaking down the book. Then, the rules of genre. Third, prose, poetry, and argument. Fourth, parables and apocalyptic texts. And we'll wrap up with essential Bible study tools.
All right, let's dive right into part one, breaking down the book.
Okay, so before you can actually interpret a text, you really have to get a sense of control over it. You can't just swallow a whole book all at once, right? To slice it into manageable pieces, we use this sort of zoom-in hierarchy to organize the book's macro structure. You start way out with the largest units, the divisions. Then those divisions are themselves divided into sections. Now, if those sections are really long, you might break them down further into subsections. And finally, you get all the way down to the segments. This logical cascade really allows you to see how the major structural relationships control the bulk of the material. Now, notice how specific Dr. Bauer is about defining a segment. Identifying this particular unit is literally the foundation of your structural analysis. A segment isn't just some random grouping of verses. It is specifically 2 or more paragraphs, roughly the length of an average chapter, though keep in mind it doesn't strictly have to follow our modern chapter breaks. What actually makes it a segment is that it's tightly bound together by a common theme and a common structure. It's pretty amazing, but by giving just a brief title to each paragraph in a segment, you can actually recall the entire flow of the text right from memory.
Moving right along to section 2, the rules of genre.
So, slicing the text structurally? That's really just the beginning. The central twist here is that to truly understand the text, you absolutely must identify its literary form. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein actually called this the rules of the language game. Every single speech act, every passage involves genre. When a biblical author sat down to write, they just naturally assumed their reader would recognize the specific genre they were using. They assumed you knew the rules of the game.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that genre is not just some dusty filing cabinet category in a library. Genre is an implicit code. It clues the reader into the specific reading strategies and moves required to properly construe a passage. Think about it. If you read a poem exactly like a history book or a logical argument like a fictional story, you are going to face some disastrous misinterpretations. Which brings us to section 3, prose, poetry, and argument. Let's look at those distinct strategies. Let's look at the specific application of our code-breaking rule here. There's a really stark contrast between discursive texts and prose narrative. On one hand, we have discursive texts. Think of the epistles, like James or Hebrews. This is logical argumentation. The default assumption here is literal language. But importantly, discursive texts move thematically, not chronologically. Verse 25 doesn't necessarily happen in time after verse 22. On the other hand, we have prose narrative, like the book of Acts. This is a story or history. Again, it generally uses literal language, but the big difference is that it moves chronologically. What happens in verse 40 actually literally happens in time after verse 38.
But wait, what happens when a prose narrative suddenly breaks that chronological sequence? Well, that brings us to flashbacks, or ellipsis, and foreshadowing. When an author pauses the chronological storyline to talk about something from the past or the future, it's a deliberate, flashing red light. The writer is pausing to urge us to ask, hey, why is this event placed here logically even if it doesn't belong here temporally? It's a massive clue for interpretation. Okay, now let's shift gears to Old Testament poetry. While English poetry relies heavily on rhyme, Hebrew poetry relies on meter and rhythm. But here is the catch, and it's a big one. Modern biblical scholarship doesn't actually understand ancient Hebrew meter. We literally don't know how it worked. So, our very best interpretive tool, which was discovered by Robert Luth centuries ago, is identifying parallelism. Synonymous parallelism is where the second line means essentially the same as the first, making them mutually interpretive. Antithetical is where the second line directly contrasts the first line. And synthetic, well, that's basically our catch-all category for anything that develops the thought in other unique ways.
All right, section 4, parables and apocalyptic texts.
Prepare for a major shift here, away from literal genres into highly figurative texts. The history of parable interpretation is this fascinating swinging pendulum.
In the early church, folks like St. Augustine treated parables as pure allegory. Every tiny detail, the dirt, the road, the coin, had its own totally unrelated spiritual counterpart. Then the pendulum swung completely the other way in 1899 with Adolf Eulager. He aggressively argued that a parable has one point and one point only, and all the other details, just meaningless color. Finally, in the 1980s, John Sider helped establish the modern gold standard. Jesus' parables have one main point, yes, but the details absolutely do have spiritual counterparts that serve to support and develop that single main truth.
Next up, we have to unpack the socio-religious mystery of apocalyptic texts, like Revelation. Apocalyptic wasn't just a literary form, it was an entire movement. These texts were written by and for marginalized groups who firmly believed God was still in control, but that his rule was currently hidden, only to be fully revealed at the end of time. Because they were trying to explain the invisible, they used highly symbolic, encoded, visual language. Therefore, your default assumption when reading the apocalyptic genre absolutely must be that the language is highly figurative, not literal.
And that leads right into this incredibly important warning. We in the Western world have a terrible habit of reading every single literary form like it's a prose narrative. But apocalyptic texts do not move chronologically, they move topically. Assuming that chapter 12 happens chronologically after chapter 11 is a massive violation of the genre. Dr. Bauer actually notes that treating apocalyptic texts as chronological prose has led to an entire massive industry of problematic eschatology.
Closely related to this is dramatic prose. Now this looks exactly like a normal story, but it acts as a vivid, cosmic illustration. Think of Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel didn't literally stand there and watch literal dry bones assemble and grow flesh in a physical valley. It's a dramatic personification of what God was doing with the entire nation. Or Proverbs 7 and 8, where wisdom is personified as a virtuous woman and folly as a prostitute. The author isn't literally giving a warning about prostitution, he's using it as a dramatic image to urge the reader away from foolishness. And finally, Section 5, Essential Bible Study Tools. We've covered some incredible ground today, but to actually equip you with the exact resources you need, Dr. Bauer is really adamant about one thing. If you really want to crack the code of these genres, a single-volume Bible dictionary simply isn't going to cut it. They're just too brief and way too sketchy. You need a multi-volume dictionary. He highly recommends the 6-volume Anchor Bible Dictionary as the absolute most authoritative. Also excellent is the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, or ISBE. But be very, very careful here. You want the recent version edited by Bromley, definitely not the severely dated 1929 version edited by Orr that some publishers will still try to push on you. Finally, the 5-volume New Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible is a fantastic modern resource to look up the specific rules of literally any genre you might encounter.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. You know now that reading ancient texts isn't just about reading words. It's about playing by the rules of the language game. You know how to chunk massive texts down into manageable segments, and you know how to differentiate a thematic discursive argument from a topical apocalyptic vision. So, my final question for you is, now that you have the structural and genre tools right in your hands, which biblical code are you going to crack first? Go open those books, and I will see you next time.